Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham Recha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Isaiah, the 18th chapter. Only about 7 verses, but still prevalent nonetheless. So this is Isaiah chapter 18, verse 1. And it says here, message to Ethiopia. Woe to the land shadowing with wings, which is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. And as we keep on reading here, it's pretty much Isaiah. He addresses a couple of things here, right? Speaking first to Egypt. And then, some mention here about what the Lord would ultimately do in defense of Israel against, as we'll see, the Assyrians, right? Because they were the main foe at this time, being that they were the superpower, right? The world superpower at this time. Now, when you read going into 19, right, Isaiah also addresses Egypt over there. But around this time, you had, and really around many times in history, you had the Egyptians who would try to form alliances with neighboring nations. And oftentimes with Israel, because Israel was like at a advantageously positioned point within that region. But they would often try to form alliances with Israel. And, as we've seen in history, in most cases, that didn't go too well, right, for Israel. Because, one, the Lord sent his prophets to warn Israel about that. And we see during, like, for example, the time of even the Babylonians, them Egyptians weren't able to help or deliver Israel, or in this case, Judah, from the hands of the Babylonians, right? So this is Isaiah 18:2. It says that sendeth ambassadors by the sea, even in vessels of bulrushes upon the waters. Now, I think this is a bit clearer here when we read this verse in the other translations, because here it would sound as though it is the Egyptians, right, that are saying this. But when you read it, and it's much clearer in these other translations, it's more of Isaiah saying this, right? So when you read here, let's pull up Bibles. In the NLT, for example, it says that send ambassadors in swift boats down to the river. Go, swift messengers. So here, Isaiah is addressing those messengers, right? Giving a message here. So that's why in most translations, they don't have that saying in there, right? It's more so just, and let me see something here. Italics Yep, in the Bible, typically italics indicate words that were added by the translators to make the translation clearer or more idiomatic in the target language, like English, right? These added words are not found in the original Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek texts. So there's some information for you. So let me see. Bible verses with italics. See if they have a few examples here. All right, they don't have a few examples here, but we're looking at one anyway. So that's why you'll see in most of these other translations, they don't have that saying, and it makes more sense that way. So in any case, Isaiah is giving this message, right, to the messengers, right? Go ye swift messengers. And why were they sending messengers? They were sending messengers because, like I said, that was something that they would do. They would send ambassadors, they would send messengers to try and form alliances. And most of the time, when Israel revolted from under the superpower at the time, from like them stopping paying tribute or trying to revolt from under them, a lot of that influence would come from Egypt. So it says here, go ye swift messengers to a nation scattered and peeled, to a people terrible from their beginning hitherto. Now, the wording here is you got to look into the actual root words here for it to make sense. when it deals with a nation scattered and peeled, right, dealing with the Egyptians, at least the description of them physically, um, let's start with the word scattered. It says here, Mashak, um, and then the most fitting definition here would be tall, right, to be tall. And when you look in the Chaldee lexicon, you'll see coming all the way down, uh, the use case that is most applicable to this verse, right, is here. As it says, pass of cow, number 1, letter, made hard, strong, in Isaiah 18:2, right, which we're looking at, a strong people. It says, drawn out, hence tall. Okay, so that definition there, to be tall, would be what's most or best applied here in Isaiah 18:2. Right, so it's basically Isaiah is saying, go back to your people with this message, to a nation that is scattered, right, tall and peeled. So now let's look at to the word peeled. All right, and we see here for peeled, it says here polished, smooth. So if you look, if we pull up once again, like the even the NKJV, right, it says, which send messengers or send ambassadors by sea, even in vessels of reed on the waters, saying, go, swift messengers, to a nation tall and smooth of skin, right? To a people terrible from their beginning onward. And so the physical description here of the Egyptians, right, more specifically the Ethiopians, was that like tall, right? They were known for being tall and smooth of skin. So when you look at the Egyptians, most of the time, even if you look at like their how they're depicted or the images on their walls, a lot of them didn't have beards, right? They shaved it off, and then they would be bald. And I believe they looked at having beards as reserved for gods or like those of a higher rank, and that's why sometimes even female Egyptian females in high positions would wear like a fake beard. So let me see if I can find something here. Egyptians and beard and beards. There you go. So you'll see most of the time they'll have that little chin strap looking joint, right? And that's why they have that. So most of it is fake beard, but it was symbolic for them. So the average folk would have that bare face, right? No beard, no bald head, that kind of thing, which kind of gives that image of you know of like a smoothness, right? Um, so it says here, a people terrible from their beginning hitherto, right? And when you go into the history of Egypt, up until they were, completely taken down, even after the destruction the Lord brought upon them when He delivered Israel, they still, stayed up, right? They were able to come back from that. They never really got back to their original top, ways, but they were able to come back as, a people, a kingdom, and so on, and still survive. And so, going back to their beginnings, Egypt was known for being, a major empire, even going back to the time of Joseph. So that's what it says. They've been terrible from their beginning hitherto, right up until now. A nation meted out and trodden down, whose land the rivers have spoiled. And when you go into the word meted out, it goes into might, right? So in essence, describing them as a mighty nation. And this is actually a good example as to why you have to look into words, because if you just go based off of the English, it really wouldn't make too much sense, right? So you have your might, and reading in here the use case for Isaiah 18:2, right? It says strength, might, a very strong nation, and the other one here would be trodden down, which here is not that they have been trodden down, but that they trod down others, right? So subjugating or subjugation, downtreading, right? It says here, once again, Isaiah 18:2, a treading down of enemies by conquerors, a people of a treading down, i.e., treading down everything. Cool. And so, as it says here, continuing on, basically here, go back to this nation of people, right? These tall, smooth-skinned people who have basically been fierce or formidable from their beginning up until now, right? A nation that is strong and basically trots down their enemies, whose land the rivers have spoiled. When you go into the word spoiled here, it goes into divide, right? So when you look at the map of Egypt, for example, you'll see that, yeah, they have different bodies of water, right? So it says to divide, to cleave, to cut through. And the main body of water that cuts through Egypt is the Nile. All right, so if you look at Egypt map, you'll see here, right, this body of water here that is sort of like cutting through that land, which makes sense, right? So when it says the rivers have spoiled, it's not that it destroyed their land per se, but it's like dividing that land. Continuing in verse 3, all ye inhabitants of the world and dwellers on the earth, see ye when he lifteth up an ensign on the mountains, and when he bloweth a trumpet, hear ye. Right. And some translations have this as rather than when he lifteth up an ensign, more so when an ensign is lifted up, or when a trumpet is blown, hear ye. Why? For verse 4, for so the Lord said unto me, I will take my rest, and I will consider in my dwelling place like a clear heat upon herbs, and like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. And here it's more so like Isaiah is saying here, like the attitude in which the Lord showed me he would take was sort of just like being laid back right now, right? So just no, not anxious, not being overly protective, but just sort of observing, right? But also providing necessity in time of need. So that's why he gives the example of like a clear heat upon herbs, right? Because when you look at the herbs, they need that to grow. And here would be how the Lord is, um, his attitude in terms of Israel at this point, right? And like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest, right? Which is like that mist, which is also needful, right? So the Lord would basically just be observing, right, or guarding, providing what's needed at the right time. Verse 5, for the harvest, afore meaning before, when the bud is perfect and the sour grape is ripening in the flower, he shall both cut off the sprigs with pruning hooks and take away and cut down the branches. And here he's speaking metaphorically here, using like the analogy of farming, right, or pruning, but is referring to the plans of the Assyrians, right? When you look this up in the NLT, it's worded a bit better there. Actually, as a matter of fact, what I'll do is let me open up a new tab here with Isaiah 18, and let's look at this in the NLT. And this is verse 5. Right. So as it says here, even before you begin your attack, while your plans are ripening like grapes, the Lord will cut off your new growth with pruning shears. He will snip off and discard your spreading branches. Your mighty army will be left dead in the fields for the mountain vultures and wild animals. The vultures will tear at the corpses all summer. The wild animals will gnaw at the bones all winter. See, now, though it doesn't explicitly mention the Assyrians here, when you look at this time, they were the main threat to Israel at this time, right? And they were the ones who the Lord would ultimately, yes, they came and the Lord used them to come against the northern kingdom and take them out of the land. But the Lord defended the southern kingdom against the Assyrians, right? When you go to the time of Sennacherib, right? Which Isaiah was around that time, along with Hezekiah and so on, right? So the Lord ended up defending Israel against those plans that the Assyrians had. In fact, the Assyrians came there with their ambassadors. This guy, Sennacherib, sent his generals to go there and threaten Israel about, or Judah, about what they were going to do to them for them trusting in their God rather than submitting to the Assyrians. And in all that, what happened right before when they came and laid siege, the Lord sent that angel, to come and slay, was it 185,000 of their men? And when they woke up and they saw that, they got up and they ran away, right? They retreated. So though it doesn't explicitly mention here the Assyrians, right? When you understand the analogy the Lord is using here, as it's clearer in the NLT, you put the piece together that they're the main foes here, who the Lord basically cut off, right? Giving that analogy of like cutting them off and basically taking them out here, so that they wouldn't be able to harm us. And so going back to the KJV, right? Continuing, well, rereading verse 6 again, but this time in the KJV, says, "They shall be left together unto the fowls of the mountains, and to the beasts of the earth, and the fowls shall summer upon them, and the beasts of the earth shall winter upon them," which is, same here, like it says in the NLT, the vultures will tear at the corpses all summer, and the animals will gnaw at the bones all winter, which is just an analogy to say, like, the Lord is going to destroy, right, or foil their plans against coming against Israel. That was like the ripening, right, of their flour and grape. Verse 7, it says, "In that time shall the present be brought unto the Lord of hosts of a people scattered and peeled, and from a people terrible from their beginning hitherto, a nation meted out and trodden underfoot, whose land the rivers have spoiled, to a place of the name of the Lord of hosts, the Mount Zion." And this is, right, going back to describing Egypt, but this is going to be fulfilled, right, at a later date, and it goes in line with the other prophecies about the nations bringing their gifts, right, onto Israel, and going to the mount of the Lord, saying, "Let us go and learn of His ways," and so on and so forth. Because when you look historically here, right, after our kingdom was split, and you had the Assyrians come up into power, and then they came and dominated us for what Israel never got to a point of control or authority or rulership to where the Egyptians would bring gifts onto them, right? So if you went back in time to around the time of King Solomon, yes, but we're at this point where Isaiah is on the scene. This is years after King Solomon is already long gone, and the state of Israel is different, right? And if you really look at it, it didn't get any, better, as in it didn't get better than that. So this didn't happen, right? But it will happen, and it won't be just the Egyptians, but here they're the ones being focused on here. That's why they're described as such. But this, along with, as it's mentioned in other prophecies, will be fulfilled once the Lord sets Israel back up at the top. And that brings us to the end of the book of Isaiah, the 18th chapter. Lord willing, is edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rakha Kudash. And until next time, Shalom.